This child molester in Thailand by the name of Mr. Swirl wasn't caught for years because he used a swirl app to conceal his identity by swirling his face. In 2007, they finally managed to unswirl his face and caught him and found him. Mr. Swirl used to go to different countries, become a school teacher, and then assault the children he was teaching. He did this from country to country, and his longest run was in Thailand. He was a Canadian man by the name of Christopher Paul Neal. To this date, he's thought to have over 300 victims. On top of assaulting the kids, he also made CP with them and had him in a huge hard drive. Some say that it was leaked on the internet, some say it wasn't. They found a lot when they raided him. Now, what I'm about to say next is about to make a lot of people mad. He is now free today. He only served about 10 years in prison in Canada. So from 2007 until 2017, he served. Now he's released and free and living in Canada. Also baffles me is the fact they couldn't unswirl his face for years. You could have picked a random graphic designer off the street and gotten them to unswirl the face in like 10 minutes. Let me know your thoughts on this story.
In 2008, a man returned home from work one evening, stepping into his apartment. He heard a faint sound, a door softly closing somewhere deeper in his apartment. He froze, listening intently, but after hearing nothing more, he decided to search every room, checking if someone had broken in. However, there was nothing out of place. This wasn't the first strange occurrence. For a while, small amounts of food had mysteriously gone missing, but he'd never given it much thought, assuming it was just his own absent-mindedness. But now, hearing that door, he realized he couldn't ignore it any longer. The next day, he bought a small camera and discreetly set it up in his kitchen. That night, after returning from work and hearing no unusual noises, he checked the footage. What he saw left him horrified. A figure emerged from a cupboard door, slowly and silently. A woman, thin and disheveled, crawled out and navigated his kitchen with practiced ease. She opened his fridge and helped herself to whatever food she found. When she was done, she slipped back into the cupboard, pulling the door shut behind her. Shaken, he immediately called the police. When they arrived, they carefully opened the cupboard door. There she was, crouched inside, her wide eyes staring back at them in silence. She had created a makeshift space with a small pile of blankets, food wrappers, and a few personal belongings arranged neatly around her. The officers arrested her, later discovering she was homeless and had been secretly living in the man's house for an entire year. The woman, Tatsuko Horikawa, was eventually charged with trespassing.
This father held a hospital hostage to save his son's life. In 2015, George Pickering faced every parent's worst nightmare. His 27-year-old son, George Pickering III, was hospitalized in Houston, Texas after suffering a severe stroke. Doctors told the family the unthinkable. His son was brain dead and life support should be removed. The hospital even began preparing for organ donations. But George didn't believe it. He was convinced his son still had a chance. Desperate to protect him, George made a bold and dangerous decision. He brought a gun to the hospital and entered his son's room. Holding the staff and law enforcement at bay, George began interacting with his son, urging him to respond. For 3 tense hours, a SWAT team surrounded the hospital. During the standoff, George begged his son to show any sign of life. And against all odds, George III did. He squeezed his father's hand. It was a moment that proved he wasn't brain dead after all. Eventually, George surrendered to the police, but his actions forced a reassessment of his son's condition. As days passed, George III's recovery defied expectations. He eventually woke up and made a significant recovery thanks to his father's unrelenting belief. George Pickering faced legal consequences for his actions, but he never regretted his decision. To him, saving his son's life was completely worth it all.
These real accidents are too scary. A mother in California was taking care of her child at home. Because the weather was too hot, the mother put the child on the sofa and then opened the door to ventilate. But at this time, 2 bulldogs quietly followed in. They walked towards the baby on the sofa. When the mother heard a cry from the fridge, she rushed over to check, but it was too late. The child had been bitten by 2 dogs. 2 boys in Colorado were playing in the yard. Suddenly, they were scared by something. The mother heard the sound and ran out to check, but she found a bulldog biting the boy's head and tried to take it away. The mother rushed over and poked the lion's mouth with her hand to save the boy. The boy was taken to the hospital. His face and neck were bitten by the lion. After a man in Florida went out, he found a 6-meter-long crocodile at the door. Then the man took out a pistol from his house and fired 2 shots at the crocodile. Then he fired another shot. The man went up to check if the crocodile was dead, but the crocodile bit his head off. In the end, the 300-kilogram crocodile was executed. A group of people in New Mexico were participating in a marathon. One of the women ran too slowly and left the team. Finally, she entered the territory of the black bear. Black bears don't usually attack humans, but in order to protect the cub, he bit the woman on the ground. Later, the black bear was found dead by wild animals.
Creepy last words people said right before dying. Anna said that her grandfather died from lung cancer. He was fine, but then once he was diagnosed, he deteriorated very quickly. Within a month from his diagnosis, he had passed away. She said that her father took care of him in his room around the clock until the day that he died. During this time period, he would get very focused on the corners of the room. He would stare at them, and then later he would say things like, "Get them away. I see them in the corners. And I see the dark in the corners." Anna said that her and her family would ask, "What? Where?" But the only thing he would say was, "The corner." Anna said that her mother witnessed this and got very frightened. Anna's mother said that what he was seeing was not a good sign and that it could mean that he has many sins. Her mother grew up in a small village where there were many sayings like that. She said that some people usually see their dead relatives when they're dying, but others see some not so good things. Anna thinks that her mother was implying that he was seeing demons.
The boiling chocolate exploded, hurling shards of glass and scalding liquid into her eyes. She ran to the bathroom, splashing water on her face, but her eyelids had quickly swollen and sealed shut. Rushed to the hospital, doctors said the damage was so bad, it was like someone had taken a razor blade to her eyes. Every day, nurses would have to pry her eyelids open for her eye drop treatment, which was incredibly painful. But after 5 days, she was able to open her eyes, and in just 2 weeks, her vision was back to normal.
On Halloween night, 1984, a pregnant mother opened her front door and found an adult male wearing a wolf mask carrying a machete. She immediately knew that this was no trick-or-treater and began yelling for help and told her young daughter, Deanna, to hide. However, with her husband at the store, she never stood a chance. The intruder violently ended her life. Once Deanna heard her mother's screams, she ran behind the couch and covered herself up, praying that the intruder wouldn't find her. He paced around the house, checking closets, bathrooms, and underneath beds. After a couple of minutes, he yelled out, "If you say anything, I will come back and I will kill you." He then left the scene. The husband arrived home a minute or two afterwards and called the police. The police immediately suspected the husband and took him into the station. However, surveillance footage of him at the grocery store cleared him right away. However, it didn't take long for the police to find out who the real killer was. Doreen and her ex-husband Michael shared a son a few years before the crime. Unfortunately, the young boy drowned and Michael tried to sue Doreen for his death, but lost. The fact that Doreen remarried and created a new family pushed him to insanity. Due to overwhelming evidence, he was sentenced to death.
This Michigan mom tried to set the house on fire after removing all the smoke detectors with her 3 kids inside. Behind me is 46-year-old Raconda Singleton. She's being charged with a ton of things, and this whole smoke detector fire incident led to the death of one of her daughters. This happened last week, Saturday on January 25th at 7 a.m. 42 firemen arrived to the scene super quickly. They went to the house, they got the 2 kids out, but the mother said, hey, there's one more upstairs, that was her daughter. They tried to do CPR and life-saving maneuvers on her. She had to get transported to the hospital. She had a ton of smoke-related injuries from inhaling those fumes. And of course, she was directly in the fire. She was literally getting cooked. They investigated and they saw that she actually poured lighter fluid just all over the house, on the couch, upstairs, downstairs, everywhere before she set it on fire. Her 12-year-old that had to be transported to the hospital died on January 27th on Monday. That is what led to her charge of murder now. After an interview on why she may have done this, she said she was dealing with a lot of mental health issues and she had nobody to talk to. I mean, this is just unimaginable too. And all the kids were asleep when the house went up in flames.
This documentary will haunt me for the rest of my life, but it also happens to be one of my favorites. It's called Paradise Lost, and it details the horrific crime of the murder of 3 8-year-old boys in West Memphis, Arkansas. Like, the crime scene is shown in it, and it's horrifying. It happened in 1993 in a small, deeply religious town. So what did they do? They blamed it on goth teenagers. Reminder, I cover a lot of dark stuff on this page, so viewer discretion is advised, but follow along if you want to hear more. This documentary is called Paradise Lost, and it features these 3 goth teenagers in question, who they called the West Memphis 3. And it's one of the clearest examples we have of a modern-day witch hunt. Like I said, they show the crime scene in this documentary, and it's so depraved that people in the community assumed that the only explanation was that it was the work of the devil.
Christopher never hurt anybody. He had a gentle, loving, and giving heart. And they crucified him in those woods.
The police were under immense pressure to solve the case quickly, so they leaned into the idea of satanic ritualistic killings. So they found themselves asking who could be the local devil worshippers, and it was these kids. These are what they refer to as the West Memphis 3. Damien Eccles became their primary target because he was pretty open about the fact that he liked horror novels, heavy metal music, and he wore black and liked astrology. And by that logic, I'd be a suspect. There's no physical evidence, by the way.
Participated in any type of human sacrifice?
No, I have not.
Jason Baldwin was implicated because he was Damien Eccles' friend, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. was like an acquaintance of theirs. The authorities also exploited him. He had a reportedly low IQ, and they put him through a highly suspect 12-hour interrogation without a parent or lawyer present. It also resulted in him giving a fragmented, incoherent confession, which many consider to be a false confession. But the prosecution relied heavily on that confession, and they all went to prison. Jesse Miskelly and Jason Baldwin were sentenced to life in prison without parole, and Damien Eccles was sentenced to death. This documentary also sparked outrage, especially to people who've ever felt like outliers of society. 2 additional movies were made after this, following the West Memphis 3 fighting for their freedom and their lives. This documentary exposes how fear, bias, and media can affect public opinion, and how these 3 were scapegoated and turned into the perfect villain despite no evidence tying them to the crime. I'll leave you with this.
Jesse Miskelly Jr., Jason Baldwin, Damien Eccles. I promise you, as God is my witness, I'll visit all 3 of your graves.
This is the case of the identical twins. One was found dead at the bottom of a cliff, and the other was arrested for her twins' murder. If you haven't seen it already, the newest episode of my podcast, Hot on the Case, is out right now. There's a video version and an audio version. If you like my videos here, you'll love my videos there, so go check it out. The identical twins in today's story, Allison and Anne, were always very, very close, but almost too close. They were very codependent. They did everything together. They even showered together. They just could not be apart from each other. People actually said it was like they had one soul separated into 2 bodies, and that they could quite literally read each other's minds. But the codependent relationship between the twins could also be really dark, twisted, and violent. The 2 would constantly fight, and it would get really physical and violent. The 2 actually ended up opening their own yoga studio together in Palm Beach, Florida, and it was very successful, which is why they're known as the Yoga Twins. The twins actually got so popular that they were offered their own yoga twin reality TV show, and they wanted to get a new, bigger, nicer, and fancier yoga studio for the TV show, but then this TV show actually never ended up happening. So now the twins have this big fancy yoga studio that they couldn't afford. They actually ended up shutting down the yoga studio very abruptly and in a very shady way, without paying their employees for that month or refunding people's memberships for that time period. They were actually so hated in Palm Beach that the twins left town due to the scrutiny and moved to Utah. But there was so much bad publicity tied to their names. They even had snark pages made about them on the internet that they ended up changing their names. So now Allison was Alexandra Duvall and Anne was Anastasia Duvall. In Utah, the twins tried to open up another yoga studio, but that one flopped and it went under very quickly. They were in so much debt, they had to file for bankruptcy, and they were under so much stress that both twins developed a drinking problem. They started drinking a lot. Now they're adding a bunch of alcohol into an already toxic, violent, codependent relationship between the 2 twins. Alexandra actually got a DUI in Utah. She posted bail and then fled the state. The twins decided to move to Hawaii. On May 29th, 2016, Anastasia had planned a camping trip with her new boyfriend named Federico, and her twin sister Alexandra kind of decided to invite herself and tag along on their couple camping trip last minute. And Federico was actually trying to help his girlfriend Anastasia stop drinking, so this was actually an alcohol-free camping trip, but Alexandra snuck some in. They actually weren't even at the camping spot for very long. Federico left for a second, turned around, and realized that the twins were gone and they had taken his car. The twins were actually driving on the very notorious highway, the road to Hana, which is a very beautiful road, but it's actually quite dangerous because it's very twisty, turny, narrow, and on the side of a cliff. People driving around next to them saw the twins fighting in the car, punching each other, pulling each other's hair, and slapping each other. And they're doing this while driving on this super dangerous road. And then those witnesses saw the car take a sharp turn left and accelerate off the side of the cliff. Alexandra, who was driving, walked away with only minor injuries. She survived, but her twin sister Anastasia was tragically dead at the scene. So the police are trying to figure out what happened here. They have all these witnesses saying that they saw the twins fighting in the car, and then the car just suddenly drove off the cliff. And then they realized that there's a bunch of tire marks, skid marks on the road that were consistent with someone accelerating off of the cliff. There were no signs that they tried to brake or slow down or anything. And Alexandra was showing no emotion, even though she just drove off a cliff and her twin sister was dead. Alexandra, who was the one to drive off the cliff, had a blood alcohol level of 3 times the legal limit at the time of the crash, so clearly very intoxicated. Was this a drunk driving accident or a murder? Did she purposefully try to drive off that cliff to kill her sister? Anastasia's boyfriend Federico, who was actually on that camping trip with the twins, said that he didn't seem shocked that something like this happened. He said that him and Anastasia were trying to actually plan their own life together, separate from Alexandra. Anastasia wanted to quit drinking, move away, and start a life and a business with Federico, and this made Alexandra furious. That the week before the crash, Federico said that he heard Alexandra say that she wanted to kill her sister. And this is really weird, but before the crash ever even happened, Alexandra would tell people, "I killed my sister," like it already happened. Federico also said that after his girlfriend Anastasia died, her twin sister Alexandra started to wear her clothes. She tried to come on to him and even tried to get in the shower with him, like she was trying to take over Anastasia's life. The twins' own father actually said that it should have been the other twin, that the wrong twin died. And almost immediately after the crash, Alexandra was arrested for another DUI. She was swerving on the road and almost hit a bunch of pedestrians. And once again, she was over 3 times the legal limit. And this is right after she was in this terrible, traumatic car accident where her sister died. Eventually, Alexandra was arrested for the second-degree murder of her sister, and her defense actually tried to argue that Anastasia, the sister that passed away in the crash, was actually the one that caused the crash because she was fighting with her sister who was driving and pulling at her hair, and that's what caused her to drive off the cliff. The judge actually ended up finding that there wasn't enough evidence to convict Alexandra beyond a reasonable doubt, so he found her not guilty and released her. I'm sorry, she was 3 times the legal limit. We couldn't even have convicted her of vehicular manslaughter. But Alexandra Duvall is out free right now, and there's a lot of people that think that she got away with the murder of her twin sister, but I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Do you think she got away with murder? Do you think that she was also attempting to try and take both of their lives when she drove off that cliff? Or do you think it just was a terrible, terrible accident? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time in my next video.